What do you think about emergency funds? How much should you have, and where should you park that money?
So I'm a little bit of a contrarian when it comes to emergency funds. So I'm not sure everybody needs to have one. I don't have one, as an example. So the wealthier you are, the less you need an emergency fund. And that's probably pretty logical. Depending on what you have in your life also depends on whether you need an emergency fund. So for instance, let's suppose you live in a city and you rent an apartment and you don't own a car. Well, there are very few economic emergencies that are going to affect you. Well, let's suppose that you own a house and you're out in the suburbs and you own a car, maybe a couple of cars, and maybe the cars are older because you haven't fallen into the trap of car payments, so that's a good thing. But now, older cars break down occasionally, and so maybe you'll be hit with a $1,500 transmission repair out of the blue, or maybe the water heater in your house goes out. Well, now you need a different emergency fund, especially if you don't have a lot of invested assets. So the more invested assets you have, the less of an emergency fund you need. So if you are completely out of debt and you have some assets going on and you have good credit, which you probably do, I would say I wouldn't have an emergency fund because, again, and if you have one, by the way, you need to hold it in cash. So cash is pretty unproductive. I'd rather have the, say, $2,000 emergency fund invested in earning money for me. And then if I have an emergency, I'll drop it on my credit card. And because emergencies, by definition, don't happen all that often. So there's a lot of different ways to look at them. But if you're going to have one, if you decide, I don't have a lot of invested assets, maybe I'm still working my way out of debt. Actually, if you're working your way out of debt, I would not have an emergency fund. I'd put it against the debt because you can always use your credit card for the emergency if you have to. Better to pay off the debt now. And if you have to add the debt later, then you do that. But if you're even and, you've got some things that might cause you emergencies like a house and a car, then keep it in cash.